Hey everyone, it's Alex, and in this video we're going to be discussing 10 of the best decks in Marvel Snap, and these decks have been designed and curated using a wide variety of sources to ensure that you're getting the most consistent results and the best decks in Marvel Snap. Now, one thing worth noting here, and I was going to make this a whole separate video, but I'll just mention it here quickly, is be very wary of data right now, because I think the data collection is kind of getting skewed a little bit with not only Conquest not having necessarily fully accurate data and less data samples, because also remember Conquest, you're facing off against the same person with the same deck, so the data isn't quite as clean. It's also worth noting that we're seeing a lot more bots on the ladder right now. And so for whatever reason, data is getting very skewed and unreliable. And so while I was going through things this past week, I noticed that we're seeing some very inconsistent results. So just be very cognizant of that and be very wary of outlandish claims, which, let's be honest, YouTube is just filled with outlandish claims and thumbnails and titles and stuff like that. So just be a little more cognizant of that, because I think that data is a little less reliable this season than in the past, based on the number of bots we're seeing, and of course with Conquest mode as well. So I tried to do my best to kind of ensure that you're getting a well-rounded experience in this video. So hit the like button if you like to support the series, and subscribe if you're not subscribed already. We do this every single week, and we do the Snapchat podcast every week with Coccia as well, and you don't want to miss that. And subscribing helps to make sure you see those videos when they're launched. Regardless, let's get started. So the first deck we need to talk about today is Collector and Bast Bounce. This is the newest iteration of Bounce, and essentially this one X's out the Iron Man, which we were seeing in most circumstances, and instead runs Collector now. The reason for this is because Collector, when it gets dropped on 2, is one of the best tempo plays you can do. On occasion, you're actually playing Collector on 3 in addition to Kitty Pryde, because the way these decks are being played right now is you usually play Bast on 1, or you play Kitty Pryde on 1, and then what you do is on 2 you play Kitty Pryde plus 1 like a Spider Ham, and then on 3 you play Kitty Pryde plus Angela, and then on 4 you play Kitty Pryde plus Bishop. Right? So there's these combo-centric plays where Kitty Pryde is kind of the primary engine you want to get going here. And then with Collector, every time Kitty Pryde bounces back, it gets a plus 1, of course, and then that obviously synergizes with the Falcon as well. So there's a lot going on with this deck list. It is one of the best point slam decks in the game, because quite frankly, the turn 5 or 6 play with Hitmonkey and Mysterio is simply unmatched. And if you're against someone in Conquest that's playing something like a Wave or whatever, you know that you have the Chavez on turn 6 to bank on, and then so you can play out your turn 5 Hitmonkey, Mysterio, and whatever, and you're going to be absolutely golden. It's a fantastic deck and one of the top in the meta. Another week, and so far the early statistics show that Evolutionary is still a very viable and strong deck. It has come down a little bit, but still very strong, notably the nerf to Wasp. What happened with Wasp here, for those that may not realize, is that Wasp was changed to afflict only one enemy target with -1, which makes perfect sense because the way it was being cycled, specifically with the use of Jane Foster, made it so that you were generating an insane amount of value with Wasp and Lockjaw, so that has been toned down a bit as well. It's also worth noting that you have a change to Hulk, where it only generates the value when it's in play or if in your hand, which kind of reduces its overall ceiling, which makes the deck a little more risky from a power perspective, but still extremely strong. I'm seeing some iterations running Sunspot now to kind of take advantage of the wasted power that Hulk might not be achieving, but currently, in terms of the meta, this is the one that most people are playing and has the most consistent win rate currently. It is very standard, and one thing I will say, it's the Killmonger that is being utilized in order to try and take down the Kitty Pryde. The reason for this is because in early turns, especially the turns 1, 2, and 3, you're probably not really playing that much. So on turn 3 or 4, you actually likely have conceded initiative, allowing you to play Killmonger even into the Lockjaw if you want, and being able to wipe out the Kitty Pryde that goes on the board for bounce, right? So the Killmonger is used to take out the bounce, but ultimately Evolutionary is still pretty damn solid despite the changes. The Marvel Snap meta has been in this weird spot lately where it's kind of just treading water. It's not changing all too much. We've had some very minor adjustments to High Evolutionary and others, but mainly you're seeing Sera Control remaining an absolutely top tier choice in the meta, and for one reason is just simply Enchantress. Enchantress remains a very strong card, and specifically for those that are trying to play the Jean Grey. The interaction was initially bugged, now it's been fixed, so if someone plays Jean Grey, you can follow up on tempo with Enchantress, a 4/5 play that knocks out the ability for them to restrict your play with Jean Grey, so that is absolutely perfect. The result is a deck that honestly does the best of both worlds. You have the control of Shang-Chi Enchantress, you have the point slam capabilities of, the Hitmonkey, the Mysterio, the Bishop, and of course the Kitty Pryde as well. Snap conditions include Kitty Pryde on turn 1, and it's just one of those decks that really does everything. I love the addition of Killmonger and Nova, which allows you to counter other Kitty Pryde based decks, although it can be a little tricky because of the priority dance between the two bounce lists. But regardless, Sunspots, Nebulas, and others get completely eaten by the Killmonger, which is used as a tech card in this list and does not really factor into your own Kitty Pryde. Just make sure your order is right. But ultimately, Sera Control remains an absolute top tier choice in the current meta. The latest versions of the Shuri based decks and the archetype itself are now including Kitty Pryde, which makes a whole lot of sense when you think about it, because Kitty Pryde, A, is a fantastic card. B, pretty much everyone has it if you're playing at the time when it was given out for free. If not, it's Series 5, which kind of sucks. But anyways, Kitty Pryde is just good, and it makes this deck better because if you have a massive Kitty Pryde, guess what? You can just play Taskmaster on turn 6 with it, right? Which is great. And of course, you have the Shuri capabilities as well. So like there's so much here. There's so much about this deck that just works with Kitty Pryde. You have the, Kitty Shuri combination, Taskmaster turn 6 with Kitty itself. You have the Shuri Taskmaster and Red Skull combo. You have the She-Hulk with the floats on turn 5 if you're trying to counteract the Shang-Chi, especially if you're in something like a conquest mode. There's just too many options with this deck, and Sauron itself, of course. Sauron does help things like Lizard, but honestly, the way the meta is running right now, Lizard tends to be pretty good. It's very risky against bounce because they can go quad into that lane very easily, but that's where you want to make sure you have Sauron available for that Lizard. It can just be tricky because Lizard coming out on turn 2 obviously dodges the Sauron because it has to be in your hand or in your deck and not on the field of play. But ultimately, I do think that this deck is really strong, but don't forget that you do have the 0 into Lizard combination turn 1 and 2. This has so many good archetype kind of capabilities. It can really win so many matchups, and it's probably one of my favorite Conquest decks right now. It's one you can lean on in the current meta. Now, I don't want to say that Evolutionary Lockdown is a winner after the latest patch. After all, the Wasp did get nerfed, as did Hulk, which definitely takes the top end and the low end out from the deck a little bit. But very notable for this deck was that it was Cyclops that remained untouched, and it's Cyclops that really has a huge impact on this particular archetype. So I expect the lockdown versions of High Evolutionary to come on the rise, as honestly it's less impacted by the changes to High Evo as a whole, but it still remains a very good deck. Notably, it's very good against bounce because it denies locations. Think about how much location denial you have here. You do have the Storm, you have Spider-Man, you have Professor X, and of course you have Daredevil. It does feel a little weak with the Nebula, so what I would recommend doing, now this is the metadata side of it, honestly, but what I tend to be doing right now in my early testing, well, what just happened there? It didn't even bring up my ones. I would take out Nebula, and I lean towards including Sunspot now. The only risk is that you are seeing lots of Killmonger, but Sunspot's going to be a little more reliable against something like a bounce list, right? Because with the Nebula, they can bounce so easily non-committal into it. So this is another variation you might want to consider. This is probably what I would lean towards, honestly. If you don't have Jeff, you're including Sunspot anyway. Jeff and Sunspot are the substitution if you include the original Nebula. But regardless, I do think that you're going to start seeing more lockdown versions of Evolutionary because it just simply wasn't as impacted by the nerfs. It's performs very well against bounce, and ultimately Cyclops is legit the best Evo card now, right? So you're going to see more lockdown, but you know what? It's a good deck. Early stats would indicate that Null is getting to the hands of more players this week thanks to the Spotlight Cash system, so I've got a destroy deck for you here that works really well with your newly acquired Null. It's a very straightforward list that has a very straightforward play pattern. Basically, you're trying to destroy Deadpool as often as you can so that it doubles its power and generates a lot of value. What that allows you to do, of course, is allows you to get that death as a lower cost while also increasing the value of Null, because every time you destroy Deadpool, that feeds into the Null. Yondu feeds into both Null and Death. Venom is great as well, because if you have a pretty big Deadpool on the board and Venom eats it, it actually absorbs that power as Null, as Deadpool bounces back to your hand. And then what happens is you also get the value from Wolverine and all the rest, the usual suspects. One thing worth noting here is that Killmonger, you might think, oh, Killmonger, that's a bounce counter for Kitty Pryde. It's really not in this list. It's really an activator for Deadpool and Nova. The issue for Killmonger, realistically, is that if you're against Kitty Pryde-based decks, the initiative will always be against you. You'll always have initiative because Kitty Pryde's always bouncing, and so you're never really going to take her out. Generally speaking, that's why Shang-Chi's in the deck, ironically. First of all, Shang-Chi does provide you with some utility, like in games where you'll be able to snipe something on turn 4 or 5 and feed that null. That's pretty cool. Like if they play Devil Dinosaur on turn 5, you can maybe snipe it on turn 6 in conjunction with a free death, right? So if you're destroying a lot of stuff, if they play Devil Dinosaur, you might be able to kill it with Shang-Chi and actually have death at a 2 cost. Conversely, if you say have a monster island, you can destroy that monster, feed 9 power into null, while also giving yourself an increased chance of winning that location itself. So there's lots of different synergies here, and playing the deck takes a little bit of practice, but ultimately you're usually playing death on not on turn 6 because it's very rarely a 0 cost card. It's usually going to be discounted and you're playing it on turn 5 or 4, but regardless, the play pattern of the deck is pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it, and it remains a really top choice in the meta. For the hidden gems of the week, we're going to do things a little differently. I'm actually going to show you 2 of my personal brews and then 2 hidden gems as well. The reason why I'm using a couple brews this week is because, again, my data confidence was a little lower because I think it's getting skewed a little bit, so I want to show you some creative stuff that I know worked well for me. This is the deck that took me to Infinite. It's Surfer Gene is not my lover, and I got to tell you, it is a good list, and I love it. If you love Silver Surfer, which you know I love, you are going to thoroughly enjoy this deck. Now, of course, it uses Jean Grey, which is the Series 5 card that you may or may not have unlocked this week. And if you didn't, I have another deck for you coming up right after this one that'll kind of alleviate that. But honestly, this deck performed amazing. It gave me an opportunity to not only get to Infinite, but to basically play Jean Grey and Groot, which is great. 2 great combinations with one another. Jean Grey into Brood is great as well. The card that really stood out for me, honestly, was Polaris, because if you play Polaris on turn 5, you're pulling one of their earlier drops out of the Jean Grey location, forcing them on turn 6 to have to play something there, which can be really annoying and cause an immediate retreat. The low-key MVPs, though, are Invisible Woman, Killmonger, and Shadow King. The reason for this is simple. With Invisible Woman on the board, Killmonger reveals last, which basically destroys bounce-based lists, because with Killmonger behind Invisible Woman, Kitty Pryde and everything lands, they sit there, and then the game ends, and then the Invisible Woman reveals, and Killmonger wipes the board. Conversely, the Shadow King is one of those cards that does not want initiative, right? Does not want initiative. And the result there is that if you play the Invisible Woman, you play the Shadow King behind them, anything they play in that location afterwards gets destroyed by the Shadow King. The only tricky thing is you'll want to make sure that you have something like Invisible Woman, Killmonger, Shadow King, and then Surfer as the 4th card to make sure you're hitting everything with the buff. Regardless though, this deck performed amazing. I absolutely loved it. It got me to Infinite. I've been playing it in Conquest to good success as well. It's my favorite list so far right now. And if you're looking for a brew that's kind of interesting, you could try this one, especially if you have Jean Grey. Alright, this next deck is a straight up brew of mine, and I've only had a day or two to actually test it because, well, the patch just dropped. But I call it Wakanda Waves. Now, what are you thinking there? You're thinking, Alex, there's no wave in here. Why aren't you using wave? Why is it called Wakanda Wave without no wave? Well, that's because it's a surfer deck, and surfers surf on waves. I know this particular surfer does not surf on waves. We're not focusing on the right things here. But what I'm going to tell you is that I like the initial impressions of this deck. I'm still making some modifications. Like, for instance, I'm still using Luke Cage, right? Because Goose sucks against bounce. Luke Cage is still pretty good for us, right? But I still think there's room for perhaps a better 2-tech. Like, you could even use Jeff, honestly. You could use Jeff. But I think that the 2 slot, you need 2 drops with a tech-oriented design. Even Scorpion could be good. Like, I'm still working on the list, okay? But regardless, I do think that this is pretty neat, and let me explain why, okay? So you do have the standard package of, Sera, which I still like in Surfer, by the way. Spider-Man's still good, too. If you want to put Spider-Man in there, it's pretty interesting. But Storm, Juggernaut, still natural. Awesome stuff. The thing I really like about this deck is the Invisible Woman and the inclusion of something like a Nakia, which makes a turn 6 Brood even better. Because if you play Nakia early on, like say you played Nakia and Luke Cage on turn 5, okay, that's awesome because on turn 6, right, you can Brood and Silver Surfer, and that's a way bigger hit, right? You're adding way more power across the board. It's literally 4 extra power into that one play, not even including the buffs, right? So it's kind of crazy what Nakia can do even on turn 5 with Brood Silver Surfer. You can also consider playing Nakia on turn 3, of course. I'm trying to experiment with Nakia. But the thing I really like about this deck, and Nakia's still kind of cuttable, honestly. But anyways, the thing I really like about this deck is actually Gambit. The reason why I like Gambit is because with the Invisible Woman, you can have Invisible Woman, Killmonger, Gambit behind it. And the thing I love about that is that Gambit, like, you can discard the card at the end of the game. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter behind Invisible Woman. Moreover, if you Sera on turn 5, Gambit on turn 6, again, discarding a card doesn't matter. You just destroy a card on the other side. It's a 3/3. It gets buffed by Surfer. So your turn 6 with Sera might look like, Killmonger, Gambit, Surfer. or it might look like Brood Gambit Surfer. Something Gambit Surfer on turn 6, and you're blowing up a card and buffing your board. Crazy. I think that Gambit is low-key beautiful for Surfer, and so we're starting to experiment with that. So again, this is a brew, so your mileage may vary. Nakia still feels cuttable. The early kind of, honestly, I kind of wish, and Nakia's good. Nakia's kind of interesting here, and I'm still working on the list, but ultimately, I think that this is interesting. It's a good start, and if you're looking to brew a little bit, and you're looking to start with something, this is probably a good place. And now we're on to our hidden gems. We've got 2 of them, and the first one is Thanos Priority Zoo, and I love this deck. Now, first of all, it has a card, one of my favorite cards in the game, which is Valkyrie. I love Valkyrie. I never get sick of playing Valkyrie. It also uses Ghost to flip the priority in for Valkyrie, basically. But the key thing here is that everything here is ongoing with the exception of Shang-Chi, which is kind of necessary because Shang-Chi is, well, we'll say, a good card. It utilizes Thanos here because you're going to generate some value with the stones that are on available here. Now, note that we only have 2 ongoing stones, including the Power Stone and the Soul Stone. Those will be the ones you really want to focus on. But of course, you can also use the Time Stone to get out the Professor X early, which is key. Lockdown on turn 4 can often catch your opponent with their pants down. And then you can also get that Blue Marvel out on turn 4 as well, which is a beautiful thing if you Time Stone on turn 3. Regardless, you can also get that Time Stone on turn 4. You can Spectrum on turn 5. It's pretty cool what you can do with the Time Stone. Just note that you have a whole bunch of opportunities with Time Stone in this particular deck. Mr. Fantastic Armor. These are all great cards. Armor obviously designed to defend the Power Stone and the Soul Stone specifically. The other ones can get destroyed. They're not that big a deal, but those 2 should be behind Armor. Regardless, and of course, Ant-Man's going to be behind the Armor. So he's usually the Armor, Ant-Man, and the 2 stones with the ongoing effects. It's also worth noting that if you're going to play the Soul Stone, playing it with Valkyrie is a good choice if Blue Marvel's not on the board. But the reason why that's so valuable is because you play the Valkyrie on top of the Soul Stone, everything gets buffed to a 3, but your opponents get the ongoing negative effect. So regardless, Priority Zoo is actually a lot of fun. I have been experimenting with this deck quite a bit, and it is a lot of fun to play. It really does work well, and your opponent's not prepared for it. They're just not prepared for it. And you also get some armor tech against a lot of the Destroy you're seeing, which is gaining in popularity this week because of, well, Null being in the Spotlight caches. So it's a pretty good deck to pull out if you're looking to kind of make a bit of a splash in the meta. I gotta tell you, it's always nice to see when Collector Shield Soar is a gem. Now, listen, Collector recently got buffed. Not recently, it's actually been a bit that Collector got buffed, but Collector got buffed, and now you're seeing a whole bunch of love there, and specifically with that Nick Fury-based Zabu list. Anytime you see Zabu Nick Fury, you know you're gonna love it because the deck just works well. It generates a lot of value here, and the newest iterations of it are including Kitty Pryde as well, because why not? Kitty Pryde's pretty much everywhere at this point, so Kitty Pryde is being played in this deck as well. The reason, because it not only buffs the Collector itself, but it also plays very nice with the Quinjet into Coulson and Nick Fury stuff, because like for instance on turn 6 you can play a Nick Fury card that's now discounted to a 5 cost, so a 6 cost is discounted to a 5, so you can play that 6 cost and play Kitty Pryde at the same time thanks to Quinjet. So Quinjet has some added value here. You have the tech of Shang-Chi, you have the straight up generation of Nick Fury and Agent Coulson, which provides your opponent with like a lot of like question marks. They don't know what you have, right? Which is pretty damn cool. And the Quinjet interaction with Agent Coulson and Nick Fury allows you to basically generate cards and play like with better tempo, because like you might be playing a 4 on turn 3, and there's going to be times where you're going to have like extra mana available for that Kitty Pryde balance, and of course Agent 13 with generation as well. Regardless, it's a well-performing deck in the current meta. You're seeing a lot of Nick Fury out there, which you know warms my damn heart. But regardless, guys, thank you so much for watching this video here. We'll have more next week, and as I said before, keep an eye out for the content this week, because I'm going to be releasing some fun deck guides, some conquest matches and stuff like that. So hit the like button if you'd like to support the content. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in that next Marvel Snap video.